Well, hello, I'm Nick Goodwin, the City of Coeur d'Alene Urban Forester with the City of Coeur d'Alene Parks and Recreation Department. I'm standing here today at Tubbs Hill, which is a 165-acre natural area that is a city park and one of our natural areas in Coeur d'Alene. It's managed by the City of Coeur d'Alene in conjunction with the Tubbs Hill Foundation. I'm also with Mark Weadick, who is with that foundation. He is a forester and has been working on this hill for over 40 years. I'm also with Jack Nisbet, who is a writer and a naturalist who is assisting us today. As I mentioned, this is a city park, one of our natural areas, 165 acres of beautiful natural area here in downtown Coeur d'Alene, right at the heart of downtown Coeur d'Alene. It abuts the lake and is enjoyed by the public on a daily basis for recreation, trail walking, and just enjoying nature. This hill is one of, if not the most treasured pieces of property in Coeur d'Alene. It is rich in history, and it's extremely important to our community. And we're here today to walk the hill, enjoy it, and learn a bit with these two gentlemen.
And I'm from Spokane, and I have been hanging around with Mark, learning from him for decades, also because I'm interested in the history of who came here, usually white fur traders, right, meeting tribes. And this place works really well for that because it has this mix of vegetation and forest and views of the lake and views of the geology that just drive us all crazy. So we wanted to start at this place because Mark and I both came at this from a love of trees, and there are beautiful trees right here at the opening of the path. And I have to ask Mark why they're here, how did they survive, and what are they up to? What is their fate over time?
Well, we're on the north side of the hill, the most moist side of the hill, and at the toe of this slope, over time, the soil accumulated. It's called colluvial soil, and in this nice deep soil, we have these large white pine and western larch. These are the biggest trees on the hill, and the rest of the hill, we'll talk about that a little bit more, was subject to various glacial Lake Missoula flood episodes that washed this hill right down to bare rock. And so the soil is thin. It's only had a few thousand years to accumulate. And so we'll see the effects of that. But right here, these are the biggest trees on the whole hill.
And I guess I have to say is David Thompson's one of the guys that Mark and I share. He's a fur trader that came into this Salish-speaking tribal country in 1807, and he immediately saw tribal people building amazing sturgeon-nose canoes out of white pine bark. So we can get excited when we see white pines of this quality, clear and tall and straight.
Well, this is rotted wood. It is loaded with both potassium and phosphorus. The fungi and bacteria that break this down synthesize nitrogen from the air. And so this is the most important natural soil amendment that we have on the hill.
And as you look up the hill here, this is where we're going to be going in, and there's a series of white flowering shrubs that bloom in sequence that set the calendar for everybody, especially if you're Aboriginal people before contact, on how it works. The one we're seeing blooming today all over the place is nine bark with these hemispherical balls of white flowers that are very pretty, and 9 layers, a bunch of layers that you can peel off the trunk. And then the next one to come on is called Ocean Spray, and it's just now starting to bloom, where it keeps the blooms from last year, and then the pencils from this year are just starting to come on. Here's the pencils of the Ocean Spray coming out. The tribal people call this ironwood because it's very hard wood, and the stems of mature trees work great for digging sticks, specialty hard tools like that. So again, here's the 9 bark, here's the Ocean Spray. They're really distinctive once you get to know them. But at a distance, as you're walking past Tubbs Hill, you go through this sequence, starting with serviceberry and working its way through 6 or 7 beautiful white flowering shrubs that all have their different attributes as we move through the year.
This is an example of belt series sedimentary rock. It's quite common in this area. It's very, very old rock. Actually, on top of the rock we have a Douglas fir that is an example of phototropism, which simply means this tree, in the process of tipping over, has searched for light in order to survive. So what we see here is a pocket of root rot. It's called, the disease is armillaria. It's particularly virulent with Douglas fir. The trees have root grafts, and the rot can spread then from tree to tree. In fact, different age classes of trees of the Douglas fir are susceptible and are killed by the root rot. And you can see then that the 9 bark has come in and made a dense ground cover, and unless the 9 bark, say by fire, would be taken out, this will be the perpetual understory in these root rot areas.
And that's hard to get your mind around, like this beautiful Douglas fir forest, you know, that we were looking at and that you expect in North Idaho is just turning into shrubbery here. What does that mean? Well, if you're a honeysuckle, like on this bed one, it means you've got a great place to climb and get light. But if you're somebody going to the park, how do you deal with it? How do you manage for something like that, Nick?
So when we come into an area like this where we have a large stand of dead trees that have been affected by something like armillaria root rot, this park is, as I mentioned before, a natural area. So we treat it like a natural area, and it's managed as such. So unless we have dead trees that are at a high risk to the traveled portion of the trail, generally going to leave those in place. But if they are at high risk to the trail, we'll remove those and leave those in the natural area so that they can do their thing and rot on the ground and give us that brown cubicle rot we talked about earlier. Now, as far as for the future and how are we going to deal with this disease and how we're going to manage this area of forest, we have plans to do fuel mitigation work and reduce the amount of 9 bark in this area and other areas throughout the natural area. And then we have plans for planting programs to bring in resilient species, native species, to replenish this forest and have a dense canopy.
And we'll see some of that up the hill, right?
Yes, we definitely will.
One of the treasure flowers of Tubbs Hill in right at the mid-June time is 3-spot Mariposa lily. There's a whole bunch of Mariposa lilies in North America. This one's endemic really to North Idaho. Some people call it Kootenai Mariposa lily. It's just eastern Washington, northwestern Montana, a little bit of southeastern BC, but the Panhandle is its home range, and it doesn't grow much south of here. So it's very exciting for those of us who love Mariposa lilies to come up and just see them by the score up here. We'll see a lot of these today. And the 3 black spots inside the cup are what distinguish it. Okay, we got a change here. It's obviously much wetter. We're looking at different trees, and all of a sudden all these roses are out. Another cultural plant like the lily that is really important for a variety of reasons, but also really beautiful for just walking around in the park. But look at this tamarack tree. Mark, what is this doing here?
Well, because we're on the north side of the hill, again, more moisture, and so we pick up western larch or tamarack. We also pick up grand fir. This is the only area on the hill that's moist enough for there to be grand fir.
Okay, and along with the roses, these thimbleberries come in with the white flowers, another white flowering shrub that's going to make delicious berries, another cultural plant. But the draw is totally opened up by these dead trees, and look at what is growing back. That's what I want Mark to talk about.
So around 2011, we did another planting, volunteer planting on Tubbs Hill, and you're looking at a 2 white pine, and in the center is a natural grand fir, and that's pretty exciting to me to know that grand fir then is perpetuating itself from these few grand fir that are growing here.
So these 2 white pines are 10 years old. I'd be curious to know how old you think the grand fir is, but I'd really be curious to know what you're going to do with this. Like, how do you manage for these? Do you cut around them? Do you put netting around them so porcupines don't eat them?
Yeah, so really when the seedlings are younger, we do use netting to keep our native creatures from feasting on them. But now that we have this growth, we will continue to clear this area and try to just let these grow. I mean, we have a successful seedling planting. 10 years in, we have seedlings that are taking. So we're just going to try to promote them to continue that growth and continue to protect them as much as we can.
And so I might add that the white pine that we're planting are blister rust resistant. Blister rust has been a problem with our native white pine. It was introduced in the early 1900s, and we've been able to breed now what are white pine that are resistant to the blister rust, and so all of the stock that's being planted now is resistant stock, and that's made it possible for us then to reestablish white pine within its native range.
So this is a really good spot to look at what's native and what's been introduced and how the park has changed since Coeur d'Alene happened. Again, we have the thimbleberry, we have the ocean spray, we have a great snag for woodpeckers, but we also have an introduced mountain ash, European mountain ash, and locust, which every homesteading wife brought from the east. And then there's all these Norway maples, but they're all dead. So that's why I want to ask Mark, what happened to the Norway maples?
Well, the city girdled the Norway maples to then set the stage for us to be able, with volunteers, to go in and plant blister rust resistant white pine and western larch, and also a little bit of ponderosa pine. So thanks to girdling the maples, we were able to make a habitat then that would allow us to plant native species.
And again, this is Norwegian maple, not a native maple, and they get big and they are aggressive, I guess you would say. So how do you deal with Norway maple now? Is it okay to kill them?
Well, in the natural area, it sure is.
Okay. Right.
And if we have that population of Norway maple reemerge, we would continue that same process of girdling those trees and removing those, especially if it starts to lessen our available planting space for native species.
Okay. So you have a protocol where you can always say, here's what we do in this event. Here's an introduced plant. Here's a native plant.
Yeah, we're pretty fortunate as we have a really well-written natural area management plan that the city follows. That's our guiding document for how we maintain this hill, and always gives us direction on how we're going to move forward in different areas of the hill and how we manage.
Now here's a tree that looks completely different than anything we've seen yet, Mark. What is going on here?
Well, we are in an active armillaria root rot pocket, and as the trees are being killed by the armillaria, they're subject to attack by the Douglas fir bark beetle. What we're seeing, though, are the evidence of woodpeckers going through the bark to get the Doug fir bark beetle larvae.
And this tree still has some green at the top. How long is it going to live?
Technically, the tree is probably dead. There still may be some residual moisture in that portion of the tree's trunk, but for all practical purposes, the tree is dead.
Okay, so you have a tree that's dying. That's a big tree. Do you try to manage that in any way?
So what Mark's talking about with the Douglas fir beetle that's affecting these trees, Douglas fir beetle, as Mark mentioned, they have dealing with this root rot, so the trees become stressed. Now, Douglas fir beetle is attracted to stressed trees, and it puts up a big signal that says, come on in, come into the tree. So what we use, or we'll plan on using more in the future, is a chemical called MCH that we put up that basically puts a no vacancy sign on these trees by releasing a pheromone that deters the beetles.
So Nick, in the larger management scheme, I understand letting that sit, but are you going to try to change this over time?
Yes, as I mentioned before, we have plans on performing fuel mitigation grant. We have applied for a large fuel mitigation grant with the state of Idaho that we are hoping will get approved for. And if that's the case, you're going to see a lot of the landscape on this hill as it is right now change. We're going to be removing a large portion of this low-level brush, ladder fuels, and of course we will be removing a portion of the standing dead trees. And in that case, should we get the grant, we're going to see this in a large amount of work take place all at once. Whether or not we receive this grant, we're still planning on performing fuel mitigation work, especially in areas like this where the brush is so thick and we have so much dead fuel. But it'll just happen over a more spaced out period of time.
Okay.
So, as a follow-up to the fuel mitigation, then we're looking at a volunteer planting project to follow with Western Larch. And of course, Western Larch is very resistant to the armillaria root rot. Therefore, we can establish a stand then that will not be subject to the root rot. And larch with the habitat type here is very well suited to this aspect.
So here, there's this huge tall stump here, and these cut trees are what happened here.
In November of 1996, there was a rare ice storm. Sleet formed on trees around the valley here, and it took down a bunch of the trees here on the hill. I went in as a forester and I cruised what was the estimated damage, and it amounted to about 100,000 board feet. After negotiating which trees really needed to go, some of the trees that had only had their tops broken out, we decided to leave since those trees might survive. And so we did remove by a helicopter logging operation in March of 1997 60,000 board feet off of Tubbs Hill. And the revenue from that did go to the city of Coeur d'Alene.
And then does that mean that, when some natural disaster happens, you'll keep logging?
Yeah, so as an example, in January of 2021, we had a significant wind event in Coeur d'Alene. We had winds that reached near 70 miles an hour throughout town. And we lost a significant amount of wood. I don't have the board footage calculations that Mark was able to provide, but it was significant. And generally, as I've mentioned, our standing practice on the hill is when we have a tree that fails or a tree that has to be felled, we leave that wood on the hill and let it naturally rot and add those benefits into the soil and into the environment that provides. But in this case, when you have that large of a load of green wood, that can exacerbate some of the issues with different bark beetles that we've been facing on the hill. Mm-hmm. So in that case, we see it as more beneficial to remove that green wood as much as possible from the hill, and we use an operation using winches and our city staff to bring that wood out. In January 2021, we were able to, in about March, before the beetles emerged, to remove a significant amount of wood. We moved about 6 logging trucks off of the hill. And once again, we did sell that lumber, but the lumber sales that we went back in to pay for the city labor and just into the Tubbs Hill care account. So any funds that we generate would go back into the perpetual care at Tubbs Hill. And that will be a practice that we will move forward with little outside the scope of our management plan, but sometimes as wind events and weather events happen, we've got to change our plans to do what's best for the hill. And as we continue to have those heavy loads of green wood, it'll be more beneficial to remove it than to leave it.
So you mean that the management plan that was written 20 years ago that Mark was part of allows you to be flexible in how you deal with the park, with the area?
You know, the great thing about the management plan is it's not city code. It's a guiding document that we use to guide us in how we care for this natural area. And you know, this is a natural area, and we try to maintain it that way. It's also what we refer to as a wildland-urban interface, commonly called the WUI area, where our natural area abuts residential homes, commercial businesses. And because of that and human intervention on the hill, you know, we put out fires, we do vegetation management, and it doesn't really get to manage, the hill doesn't get to manage itself as it naturally would. So we do have to step in, do things like fuel mitigation, do things like pesticide treatment, do things that maybe are outside the scope of a truly natural environment, but it's all done in the best interest of the hill and the public.
So as we look at all this stuff and wander, there's all these people walking through, and it's certainly only getting more crowded on a pretty day. So does that factor into the plan? Does the plan address use and overuse and public crowding?
You know, as I mentioned when we first got here today, this is one of the most important pieces of public property in Coeur d'Alene to our residents. It's also by far one of the most popular. We have daily hiking on this hill. It is daily use, year-round use. So of course that is factored into our management plan in the way that our entire removal plan is essentially based on public safety and our high-use trails. So all of our removals that we perform are going to be generally based on how do we protect the public that are using the trails. And because of that popularity for things like hiking, recreational use, it's also one of the number one ways that we have our fires start that do start on the hill. So of course, when we look at these possible areas where we're looking at from a fire management perspective, we're going to look at the high use areas and where are we most likely going to see our fire start and mitigate fuel in those places first. So yeah, definitely public use is well interlaid in our management plan. It's something we factor into all decisions that we make, not just from a management plan, from an aesthetic point of view and everything that we do on top.
Some 15 to 12,000 years ago, there was an ice dam that repeatedly broke on the Clark Fork River, releasing huge amounts of water and glacial debris from that area that swept down across the Coeur d'Alene area. The city of Coeur d'Alene is on 200 to 300 feet of glacial drift. That same events put a dam across what was today the Spokane River and created Lake Coeur d'Alene. You can see the rocks in this area are quite smooth because the water and glacial drift acted as a scouring, as an abrasive mechanism, and it scoured the hill, rounded the rocks on this side. As the water spilled over the west and south sides of Tubbs Hill, the backwash from that created cliffs and ledges that give a radically different appearance than we see right here with the smooth rocks. We're on the northwest side of the hill, and the basement rock here is mica schist. Again, it's a very old rock. So on the horizon you can see Mica Peak, and the stream that drains that is Mica Creek. In the lake you'll find flecks of mica that are suspended in the water column. As the floodwaters literally roared over the hill, then we have back eddies and we have cliffs that were made as a result of the water spilling over the hill from a northerly direction. So the landform here was greatly altered by the floodwaters spilling over this side of the hill. We're on the south side of the hill, and on this dry site the ponderosa pine has been infected by a parasitic plant called mistletoe. It while it seldom kills the tree, it causes deformities, and it adversely affects the growth. This parasitic plant puts its roots, called hyphia, actually into the tree, and it lives on the nutrients that are in the tree branch or in the tree stem, and it causes over time a witch's brooming. From a forestry standpoint, this would really adversely affect the value of the trees. Here on Tubbs Hill, it's simply part of the natural environment. This is an area where you can see the effects of what was the January 21 windstorm, and the Parks Department has limbed the trees and tried to get the debris as close to the ground as reasonably possible to facilitate the breakdown. Besides limbing the trees, chainsaw scored the remaining trunks of the trees to facilitate drying out. Part of the reason for that is to get the trunks dried out ahead of bark beetle attacks. So there was a dual purpose in scoring these remaining parts of the tree.
So we have just spent all morning walking, circumnavigating Tubbs Hill. We started at this grove of trees, and now we're right back here in front of a twin tamarack that Mark and I have talked about and enjoyed for some time. And we just feel like we got another great day out of Tubbs Hill, and I'm happy to have been here and happy that it's here in the shape that it is in.
And so I've been walking Tubbs Hill for some 40 years. Back in 1996, after I retired, I joined the Tubbs Hill Foundation, or I should say they accepted my application. And so it's been, I guess you could say, a love affair for coming out and not only going around the hill, but helping to do some things that the Tubbs Hill Foundation can do, and Dave would be happy to give you a little more information on that.
And I'm Dave Yaden, president of the Tubbs Hill Foundation, and I love the hill, just as Jack does and Mark does, and thousands of other people that live in the community and visit every day. And we hope you can enjoy it into the future, and our purpose as a foundation is to try to keep it as natural as possible, and we need your help, and we encourage your help. Go to our website, tubbshill.org. We're happy to answer questions and hope you can enjoy and come out and help us preserve the hill. Thanks a lot.